Good afternoon, or it may still be morning for some of you, and I just want to thank you for joining us today. I'm Georgette Lopez Aguado, and I joined the team at Sonar in 2017. And in my current role as the Customer Experience Manager, I have the privilege of partnering with ISPs for both configuration and training, as well as ongoing adoption efforts, as they learn to leverage the automation tools that Sonar offers. Joining us today is Jeremy Austin, and I've had the pleasure of working with Jeremy on the WISP Education Committee for the past 2 years, and we've had a great time preparing this offering for you today. Jeremy, why don't you tell our guests a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Yeah. Jeremy Austin. I live in Anchorage, Alaska. I've lived in Alaska most of my life, and I've been involved in the internet service provider industry for, heck, I was just counting. It's close to 25 years. I think it'll be 25 in 2022. So I've done almost everything except for cable. So pretty much any access technology. And I picked up a few best practices for customer success, kind of surprisingly, in areas that were ancillary to my role. I've never had an officially defined customer success role in most cases, but I have had a lot of experience, helping manage customer success, whether that be in sales or direct customer support. Learn a lot about success when doing
Yeah.
support at many scales. Both as an entrepreneur and working in small and large ISPs. In fact, I came from a fairly large ISP just before moving to Preseem. And so for the past year, I've been at Preseem helping bring a WISP perspective to developing cutting edge products at Preseem. Our mission is to be a trusted long-term network solutions partner to local and regional ISPs. That's our primary focus. And we love to make tools that people love and that solve their network problems. So I'm really happy with the journey that I've had and being able to be here today.
Well, thank you so much. Just a little housekeeping note before we get started. If you have any questions during the presentation, please drop those into the Q&A window and we will endeavor to respond as time allows. And if we run out of time, I promise we will get back to you on the questions that you have for us. So without further ado, we are so glad that you have chosen to join us this afternoon. And our agenda today is fairly simple. Whether you are here live or maybe you're catching the recording, we know that you're looking for actionable items that will help you mitigate customer complaints and call volume, increase customer satisfaction, reduce churn, and so much more. While we will share some foundational elements of customer success during today's call, every registrant will receive a copy of the Ultimate WISP Guide to Customer Success, which is an exclusive PDF that we put together that'll be full of tips and tricks to improve your fixed wireless business. You will be able to see additional ideas and suggestions beyond what we're sharing today that can be leveraged for your businesses. So for now, just grab your cup of coffee and let's talk a bit about customer success. So I bet you're thinking, and you were thinking this as you were getting registered for this event, how is customer success different from customer service or even account management? Customer success at its very core is about being proactive. Currently, if your customers have problems, they submit tickets or call into your office, or heaven forbid, they blast you on social media. Your support team responds and they help resolve those problems. The focus in this paradigm is that you're focusing on a case by case, here and now situation. And account management, your account managers try to woo unsatisfied customers. And much like customer support, the focus is on here and now. Both of these models are truly reactive in nature. Customer success pinpoints problems and opportunities in a proactive manner. That happens by collecting and leveraging as many data points as possible about your customers and even potential customers. Furthermore, customer success informs strategy. It helps businesses better understand their customer experience and life cycle so they can improve upon it. On top of that, customer success team members truly focus on the customer and how that customer can succeed, as opposed to only focusing on how the company can succeed. It's a mindset shift that reaps big rewards for everybody. So let's face it, we spend a ton of our day to day time dedicated to communicating with our potential customers. Well, dedicated to communicating with our customers. We communicate with potential customers, actual customers, our team members, and even the community at large. The question is, how effective and proactive is this communication? And are there ways to be more efficient? What data is even driving these activities for you guys?
I
Jeremy?
don't think, yeah, I don't think it's possible to overstress that point, Georgette. That when you focus on solving your customers' problems, you actually do end up solving the company problems, right?
Right.
It's the customer successes at that intersection where you realize that those goals need to be aligned, and it's not we're going to solve your problems in isolation and just make you a happy customer. It's that we're going to make the company better as a result of solving your problem.
Absolutely. And proactive is just really always better than reactive. Absolutely.
Yeah.
We're going to stay focused on the essentials of effective communication, but we're going to break down this presentation today into more specifics for all of your key stakeholders. But the essentials, no matter who you're talking to, are the same: who, what, how, when, and where. So let's take these different pieces and break them down step by step and how you can leverage customer success in this whole life cycle. The who, it covers both who do you need to be sharing information with, as well as who on your team needs to be responsible for that effort. An empowered team that has fingertip access to the health of your network, for example, can leverage that knowledge to improve your end user's experience. So let's start by talking about our audiences. Who are you trying to reach? Data driven decision making is important here. So let's go through that process with a potential customer. What does success look like for them? And what do you know about them? Do you know how they use the services that you offer? We certainly saw a huge swing in work from home needs in the last 18 months. But what else changed about your customers' needs? Are you seeing a decrease in standard cable users and an increase in streamers, gamers, Zoomers? What can you offer that will make their online experience better?
Yeah, that's a really great point, Georgette. The thing that I find that's really fascinating about all successful ISPs, but WISPs in particular, is that it's really important to find out what you're good at and do that. And one of the things that WISPs are really good at is pivoting and being flexible. During the pandemic, all of a sudden we had people not just working at home at different hours of the day, but demanding a different level of service out of their home connection. Like all of a sudden you have all these business customers that you are still paying for a residential connection. And obviously at Preseem, we really help operators pay attention to how well they're actually able to serve their customers. And then thinking at a strategic level, um, you know, WISPs can often throw out point-to-point links and be faster than fiber to a market, or you might be the only operator that can find an inexpensive POP site that enables you to get into that neighborhood where all of a sudden people are working from home some more, and they're not getting the service that they need from their incumbents, or even in urban operators where you might be the operator that has the unlimited plan, whereas cable is capped, and folks who are at home needing to be on Zoom all day all of a sudden find out that they're using a lot more data than they had been. So I think that we get the furthest by caring about our customers' problems, not just the ones that they're telling us about, but the ones that you know that we can determine from the data that need to be solved, the problems that need to be solved for them, and then finding unique ways to solve them.
Fantastic. Um, Jeremy, let's move on to the next slide and let's talk a little bit about what. What are you wanting to share with your key stakeholders? For a prospect, it may be information about your uptime rates or available speeds. For a team member, it could be organizational goals and how they're helping to achieve those goals. Understanding key performance indicators are important no matter what job you're responsible for in the organization. And it doesn't matter if you're a mom and pop shop or have thousands and thousands of subscribers, knowing what good looks like helps keep the compass aligned. Communicating with your customers is so much more than just listing your service plans and special offers. For years, I have been that stalker. I've followed my Sonar customers on Facebook and other social media platforms. And almost without fail, the companies that are growing the fastest aren't the ones who consistently post about their services or their specials, but the ones who share stories, pictures from their tower climbers, technical screenshots, even holiday gatherings with their teams. People do business with people. What you are looking for here are ways to engage your prospects, inform your customers, and recognize your team. And there are metrics involved in every social media post that you put out there. Are you using those metrics?
I can't tell you how important that's been for us, Georgette. We maintain a fairly active social media presence at Preseem, and I've managed the social media presence for smaller ISPs in the past, and paying attention to how people are responding to your posts. Certainly, as you grow larger and you're dealing with, you know, more more overall, noise and clutter, that can take some time to engage in. But it requires, collecting the data and then also analyzing it and thinking critically about how you can improve it. And that process, choosing a key performance indicator or a KPI, and tracking it over time is critical at multiple levels of the company. We see that, for operators, tracking the success of a customer's quality of experience, often they'll be using that latency metric that we provide. And you don't sweep problem areas under the rug. You be proactive about it. Same thing as if somebody posts a kind of an unmanaged post that's somewhat trashing you and maybe isn't telling the whole story. And then internally, the one of the ways that we manage our customer success with our customers who are ISPs is that we want our support metrics to go down, or the number of successful tickets needs to go up, in relation to the number of customers you have. We don't just want the absolute number to go down. We actually want, the rate of tickets to go down, which means that we spend more time in the proactive part of the cycle, managing problems before they become a problem for our customers. And the fun thing about that is when you can do that, when you have the resources and time, or you prioritize that part of the quadrant of urgency and importance, then you get to spend more time in the proactive side because you end up preventing the urgent and important problems from becoming a problem. It's a virtuous cycle where success breeds success.
It really is a paradigm shift where that urgency gets pushed over because you're being able to respond ahead of time, not
not
again
reactively.
reactive,
Yeah.
not proactive.
I say that by the time the customer calls you, they're already having a bad day. You've lost.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about how you are sharing the information with your stakeholders. People consume their information differently. Do you note in your customer account in their account folios what their preferred communication method is? And if you do your team members actually leverage that information when reaching out? Are you using text messaging? Are you using emails? Are you using mass emails? How often do you communicate proactively with your customers and your team? People want to know how they are going to be impacted by your upgrades, by your expansion plans, and even disaster recovery efforts. You don't have to share every last detail, but a clearly communicated vision goes a long way in both retention and expansion efforts with your customers.
Yeah, 100%, Georgette. We're going to talk a little bit more about this in future slides as well. But I found that, like, kind of the key. I try to remember these three things about the how. The first one is really listen to your customer, because often the problem that they are describing to you isn't the real root of the problem, right? Or they may be like, this, X doesn't work, and really what they're trying to do is do something, and they're attempting to do it in the wrong way. Or they say, my internet is broken, and it's their TV is broken, right? So you have to
Right.
come to it with an open mind, not just, I mean, skepticism is probably too harsh of a word. Like the cliche in the client provider relationship is Dr. House, where he says everybody lies, right? But people lie without meaning to, because they aren't necessarily equipped to understand what the problem is. And so we, as the provider, need to come to it with an open mind, both to think, okay, this could be a problem that the customer's having. We don't automatically assume that we're at fault, but we also don't automatically assume that the customer is at fault too. And then empathize. As I said, by the time the customer calls, they're already having a bad day. And then confirmation is super important in that when we talk about this quote here about being credible, it's you have to make sure that both parties understand what the other one is saying. So make sure that you understand what the customer is saying. Make sure the customer is, you talked about using the right communication channel for that customer. I have people who like never respond to a text message and rarely respond to an email, but do really well with a voice call, or vice versa. And then also, and this was stressed to me as a member of a much larger publicly traded company, is that sometimes you don't necessarily want the engineer to be telling the customer exactly what went wrong, right? You need some translation layer there, and
Translation
it's
services.
right.
Yep.
Exactly. It's not about misleading the customer in any way, but it's providing the communication that aligns that message with the company's core values and with the customer frame of reference, their level of technicality. And I think that if you keep those two things in mind, and in some cases, the larger you get, the more specialized that process becomes. As in your case, Georgette, we've got a specialized customer success team. With the smaller company, that's just the hat that you put on when you are managing that customer success.
And that translation goes both ways. It goes from customer to developer and developer to customer. And for Sonar and for Preseem, it's making sure that we heard what we think you said and you heard what we think we said. So
Right.
communication, communication, communication.
Yeah.
At every turn.
Absolutely.
So when is the next block on our panel today? And when to communicate can be a bit trickier when you're trying to be proactive. Sure, you might have a communication in place for a planned outage, but what about an unexpected fiber cut? Do you have a plan in place so that your staff can easily reach out and say, hey, this is what's happening. This is when we expect a return to service. You're not having to craft a new email from square one or any other messaging for your Facebook or other social media. Or maybe there's a winter storm with an extended power outage. Being from Texas, I've had some experience with that in the not so far past. Proactive support means that you're helping your customers be prepared even for the unexpected events too. How about those new electronics that are going to be under the Christmas tree? Will you wait for an uptick in support calls after the holidays? Or could you go ahead and gift your customers with some guidance ahead of time for basic troubleshooting and connectivity essentials?
We could talk for half an hour on the whole concept of managing expectations, and this timing and this when of communication is so important, and this goes both ways too. I recently in the past couple of years, I was put in charge of a high revenue customer. This is at a previous job. We're talking multiple tens of thousands of dollars in monthly recurring revenue, and the customer was not happy. They didn't think they were getting what they were paying for, and we had to build trust with them so that they knew that we were on their side, right? That we really would find the root of the problem, no matter whose fault it was. And it turned out that there were some improvements that needed to be made on both sides, right? It wasn't just we can point a finger here and say immediately, if we fix this problem, all of our problems are going to go away. And so part of managing that process is mutual agreement on what the process looks like, which might be a little bit different depending on the size of the customer and the expectations. Like you put up a social media post on that fiber outage, it might be, we will post an update in another 2 hours, right? Where you manage the expectation of when, like how what's the scope of this thing, and when exactly we would expect to get another message. In the case of this bidirectional long-term project that I'm talking about, it's important to always track who's responsible for the next step. So, if someone needs to go make some engineering changes and that's going to take a week or two on their network or whatever, then it's important to get a commitment from the relevant party to say, okay, here's when we're going to provide the next update. And then the party that's waiting, I find it really helpful for them to also make a commitment to say, if I haven't heard from you in this much time, I'm going to check in, because the communication might have gotten missed, because you get an email that gets missed, or a text message, or a voicemail that didn't get transcribed, and all of a sudden the one party thinks that they've communicated and another party doesn't know. That's all part of this win. Make sure that each of you are that you've got that task or that item on your calendar where you know that you're going to be making the next check-in. And it also prevents you from doing the thing where you check in every 2 days and no progress has been made. That's just as annoying to both parties. So it's very important to manage those expectations.
Absolutely. It's about being an advocate on both sides of that calendar.
Yeah, 100%.
100%. So where are you going to communicate proactively with your customers? Are you leveraging mass emails that are targeted by an access point that's showing poor performance? Do you track the sign up rates for your installers who are consistently hanging door tags where those are allowed? And for Sonar customers, how are you using messaging on your invoices or invoice attachments? I mean, there's all different kinds of ways that we can communicate with our customers. If you're using a service such as Constant Contact or MailChimp, are you actually looking at the delivery rates, open rates, and click information? Mix up how you're reaching out to your customers and leverage the information to make better decisions month and month and month in and out. If no one is opening your message, then maybe you don't have the graphics that you need. Maybe you don't have an interesting enough story. People do business with people. Make sure you're keeping that people forward, but the metrics, because we're talking about customer success, key data points will drive how you're communicating, where you're communicating. If Facebook is where your people communicate, what's your plan on Facebook? If emails are really what your people want to receive, follow through with that.
Yeah, that's really important, Georgette. We find, so much conversation does happen on Facebook. I mean, there was even an issue that happened just last week where Google Cloud had a problem, and one of our data nodes in the cluster went down. That's never happened before, but they had a hardware failure. Google had a hardware failure. Who knows? And rather than reaching out to support, the customer, just mentioned it on Facebook, say, hey, is anybody else having this problem? Which I totally get that as a strategy where you don't necessarily want to immediately leap to the provider and say, hey, you have a problem, when what you're doing is confirming that the problem exists, right? Is anybody else seeing this? There's actually that website. Is it down or not? Or is it down for just me, or is it down for everyone? And in that case, the impact was very limited, and we were able to get it right back up. It actually came back up automatically. No data is lost. That's the way our system is designed. But in the context, which we wouldn't have happened if this had been on any other channel, another customer said, "Oh, hey, this isn't looking right for me either." And that customer, it turned out to be something wrong on their system. It wasn't something that was something we could do anything about at the time, but it turned up because that conversation was happening. So that's still a very valuable place for us, even though we love people to come and talk to us through our regular support channels. You know, heck, we monitor Reddit. From the ISP, at the ISP level, you're going to be monitoring your local social channels. There's all kinds of conversations that happen about the ISPs here in Anchorage that happen online. Those conversations happen online. So even if you choose not to get involved in them, it's still important to track them so you can be adding those to your KPIs, even if it's a fuzzy one, even if you're saying, well, we know this is what people are saying about us. That's still important things to go into your metrics to say, if you're keeping NPS scores or customer satisfaction scores. Another thing about the messaging is when you are being proactive and choosing something like your website or the notifications, it's important to, I talked about this a little bit ago, but I'm going to expand it a little bit. It's important to make sure that the scope is really managed. Like, I've seen ISPs want to do something like, I want automatic messages when that tower goes down to all those customers. And I'm like, well, are you really sure you do? Because, right, if it's a short outage, they might not notice, right? And if it's a longer outage that's going to require an estimated time to repair, or maybe you have an upstream provider that's gone down, it's important to be able to limit the communication to the appropriate scope. Or even if it's a social media post, to say, hey, it's this area that's having problems. And then people can immediately make a judgment to say, well, is that affecting me or not? If I'm having a problem, because it works both ways, where if the customer assumes that that message applies to them, they might be having a different problem, as in the example that I gave you. But because we had enough information there, that we gave enough information, that customer was able to determine, oh, I actually have a different problem. And then also, I think it's important in this type of communication to, I mean, this is a little bit more of a how, but it's to not throw anyone under a bus, whether that's, it's easy to say it's an upstream provider that we have no control over, they're down and you have no estimated time to repair, but that doesn't necessarily mean you need to name names. It's really important to understand that we are all in this together, but it's also important to be clear about that type of outage. And then I think also managing your start and end-to-end times to say, okay, we're going to provide an update at, whatever the time zone is, in 2 hours, or we're going to provide an update in 4 hours. Then people know, okay, I don't need to keep refreshing that page. If it isn't working in 4 hours, I'll come back and there'll be a new status update for me. So those simple things, who should be receiving the message, that make sure that the message itself is clear, and then make sure that it's time limited so that people understand how fresh that fruit is going to go a long way toward improving that process for you.
Fantastic. Well, we've got this quote from Winston Churchill that just really spoke to us. I am always amazed to hear and read the stories from the field. These are stories of entrepreneurship, struggles, celebrations, and everything in between. You and your teams get up every day and help bridge the digital divide with courage and with great intentions. The staff at Sonar and Preseem are honored to walk this walk alongside with you. I get to wake up every day and put my feet on the ground and help people access educational information, access medical assistance, go to work, go to school. It's pretty amazing what we all do. We hope that your customer success journey, even if it's just starting and that paradigm shift is just in its infancy in your organization, will be something that you want to embrace and learn more about. We really want to thank you for sharing in just this discussion today. And Jeremy, do you have any final thoughts before we wrap up?
I do. I one anecdote. I mean, something many of you probably don't know about me is that I have a former and parallel career as a teacher. And one of the things that I learned, probably not soon enough as a teacher, was that I didn't necessarily always have the right teaching approach for every child. Sometimes that child needed somebody who had a different approach, and it didn't mean that that was a bad child. It's that they needed an approach that I didn't have, in particular my younger years as a teacher, where I didn't recognize that right away. And sometimes this process of improvement means that you aren't always going to be a match for a given problem or even for a given customer. We joke about the whole should you fire a customer thing. In fact, I think we did a blog post on that. It's important to understand that failures lead to innovation and they lead to improvement. That process of self-improvement happens at the individual level and it happens at the company level too, if you leverage the tools that you have to both communicate that internally and also to improve the tools that you're using internally and improve the methods and procedures that you're using. I like to joke that good judgment comes from experience, and experience mostly comes from bad judgment. So failures are always an opportunity to continue, and even if that means that you lose that customer, you will have learned something from it, and you will be improved as a result.
So as we start wrapping up, we do have a question in the Q&A, and if the internet is down, how is the customer checking social media or emails? What I find with a lot of our customers is that even if their internet is down, their cell phone may still have coverage and they're accessing their emails from their cell phones. Maybe they're accessing Facebook from their cell phones. So you may not have a perfect way to reach each of your customers, but in that proactive plan that you're developing, you want to think about contingencies, if then situations.
What's the impact going to be if some channel is down? I can tell you one thing, Daniel, that that I've set up for a couple ISPs, in which I've seen it a number of large ones, is for sufficiently large outages, that just goes ahead and becomes a message that you get at the start of calling the support line. So you can immediately determine, does this outage apply to me? And if it doesn't, then you can stay on the line and say, boom, we're good to go. And the message at other times says there are no known outages, so that you can also get the freshness of that. It's not that the message goes away, it's that it becomes clear, what's available to them. And, obviously for places which have neither telephone nor cell service for data, then there really is no way to communicate that unless you're going to go around, by horseback, or maybe we'll take airplanes and scatter leaflets. But I hope we does not come to that, Daniel.
I think Jeremy and I will both tell you that we are not experts in customer success, but we are walking the walk. We're
Exactly.
excited to help get this PDF pulled together to make sure that you have the resources, the websites, the books that we're reading and consuming to grow our own experiences in this realm. We are walking this walk along with you, and we appreciate the opportunity to even open the door to this conversation for you and your teams. Sarah writes in, if your experience for WISP, do you see value added for private Facebook groups for subscribers in addition to having a Facebook page publicly? Do you want to start with that one, Jeremy?
I was actually going to suggest that you do, but I think we can both provide some perspective on this. We have not done so at Preseem, not because we think that there needs to be a space for, that we don't think there needs to be a space for it, but uh, I think that if you do, then it's important to have people who really manage that, because one of the pitfalls you can fall into is you end up in a space where you get someone who's just toxic, and they aren't telling the whole part of the story, or they're upset, and sometimes they post content that you really have to take down as an admin, that you can't leave that content up. I've seen this happen. And then you become the bully because you have censored this conversation that's happening. So I can't say that I would never do it, but I would pay very close attention to what that community of users is like. So if you're lucky, you'd have a really great community of users, and that would be something that you could do. But I've seen this happen both B2B and B2C, where often it's better if there is a private group, that it's just that the provider not have a presence in it, so that conversation can take place without the company coming in and censoring that conversation. But that's just my opinion. Really, I'm not an expert on it. I've just seen some examples of it go awry. Hope that answers your question, Sarah.
Yeah, and I think really all these questions deal with how can you be proactive with what you're doing? And it's about resources too. If you're managing both a public page and a group, do you have the resources to be proactive in both realms? Nathan has a question about, are there any CRM platforms that you would suggest to track omni-channel contact information that can both feed into and utilize the data from Sonar? Nathan, if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to take that question offline and circle back to you, and we will try and include that in the PDF as well so that we can answer that for the wider group. I think that needs a little deeper dive, and I would hate to give it just a passing glance of information. And Lindsay, do you recommend any tactics in customer retention for a mad customer whose issues are internal, although
It's a
we
great
cannot make
question.
them understand?
That's a great question.
That is a great question. How do you deal with the mad?
So I think, again, it's important to understand, to come at it empathetically. There's a reason that they're mad, and the reason may be that they're just not a great person. But very often people really are reasonable, and they have some reason for being mad. So I think that comes back down to that decision of when is it appropriate to fire a customer. There really are, and thankfully there are outliers, but there really are customers that it is in the company's best interest not to retain. Georgette, do you have any comment on that? Sometimes you're not a fit for them.
Sometimes you're not a fit for a customer, and there is it's a hard decision to make as an organization. But I want to go back to the mad customer, and I want to go back to
Yeah.
something that Jeremy said earlier. Listen. My mother told me for years that the word listen and the word silent have the exact same letters in it. And in order to actually listen to a customer, you have to be silent, not just with your mouth, but in your head. Stop answering the question you think they're asking or solutioning what they're yelling at you about, and actually listen with both your mind and your eyes and your ears to what they're saying to you. And I think you may be able to proactively help them identify what their actual problem is and lead them to a solution collaboratively, in a fashion that's going to salvage that relationship and be able to make them feel better and build the trust that they have with you as their provider.
I've been lucky to be able to be part of that in more than one occasion. I'll give you an example of a customer who was not necessarily mad, but definitely unhappy in a chronic way, and that was where the hardware vendor, they were a wireless customer, and the hardware vendor introduced a firmware revision which caused instability on that access point, and it would occasionally lock up. And the best thing I could do in the case of that customer was actually be fully detailed with them and say, I can't, in this case, I can't downgrade the firmware because of security concerns. There's a reason that they produced the security update. Unfortunately, that's introduced stability. What I can do is do some kind of watchdog, like we put in a way to at least notify and reset the service when that occurred. And I said, we will check in with you periodically to tell you whether or not the vendor has produced a new version of firmware. And eventually they did, but it was years. It was years. And so by engaging the customer in that, we weren't like, again, throwing the vendor on the bus for saying, this is the problem that we have. We are too small to make the vendor fix this problem. All we can do is keep asking them to fix this problem. And in their case, we couldn't put the customer on different hardware. So that was kind of an exception to the example that I talked about previously, where I would not normally give really technical details. In that case, we said, here's the reality of the world in which we live. We want to serve you. We don't want to take this equipment away. We don't want to fire you as a customer, but we're going to have to compromise together on this in order to get you reasonable service. And luckily, we were able to retain that customer, and they're still a customer today. This was a number of years ago. So it really does take some customization. I want to point out that I answered one chat privately managed. That was a Preseem specific question. I've answered that in the chat there.
Excellent. We really want to thank you guys for joining us over your lunch hour or this afternoon. You will receive a copy of the recording from today. If there's team members that you want to share this with, you should receive the PDF in very short order in the next 5 to 7 business days, so that you will have those extra pieces for holiday reading. We thank you so much for sharing. If you want to try Preseem, Preseem.com, and if you're ready to book a demo with Sonar, Sonar.software, and our team are ready to help you if you are not currently using one or the other of our platforms. So, Jeremy, any final thoughts before we wrap up today's webinar?
Oh, just that I've had a fantastic time. I would be happy to do this again anytime. Preseem and Sonar work really well together, and it's been fun to do this webinar together. Thank you so much for sharing your insight and wisdoms. I definitely learned some things.
Me too. Me too. Thanks so much, Jeremy. I appreciate you and the entire team at Preseem for helping pull this together.
Oh,
Thank
yeah.
you so much, guys. Have a
Thanks,
wonderful
guys. Thanks,
afternoon.
everyone.